100 days Thursday from the start of the college football season in Dublin. Quarterback situations at Ohio State, though that might be clearer than some think. And what is Michigan going to do next? Plus, Pete goes to Avon Old Farm. This is the College Game Day podcast for Wednesday, May 15th. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel here. Pete, the most important thing is that you are on the hallowed grounds of the Avon Old Farm School for Boys, the finest boys' school in all of the country. We'll get to that. But we're 100 days, probably by the time most people listening to this hear it, from Florida State, Georgia Tech in Dublin. Have you made your travel arrangements yet to get to Dublin?
I have made my travel arrangements, Rece. I have made my travel arrangements and excited for the travel to Dublin. And I'm about half Irish. I've never been to Ireland, so I'm excited about that. I live in South Boston, one of the most
that's the same thing though, right?
Noted Irish enclaves in America, actually. And yeah, I have never been. I have certainly drank enough Guinness to be an honorary Irishman. But yeah, looking forward to the culture, looking forward to the people, looking forward to kind of exploring a little bit. We'll go in a little bit early and adjust to the time change and take it all in. And I'm really curious, just like how people in Ireland are viewing this game. I talked to John Anthony of Anthony Travel, who runs the game, yesterday to talk about just some stories over there. And he talked about how much the people of Ireland and how much the game has changed since 1996 when they did the first one over there until now. I think this is like the seventh one that he's been a part of. And we have an Irish punter, Rece. Shanahan on Georgia Tech is a local. He punted during COVID on his uncle's dairy farm in Solo in Ireland. He said he would get an odd look from a calf here and there. So we always need a local angle in the media. So I am definitely happy that we have a local punter. Now, he didn't go from Ireland to Tech. He went to Pro Kick, where all the punters go.
Yeah, Australia, right?
Yes, and I think it's like 6 of the last 7 Ray Guy Award winners went to that. But David Shanahan, he grew up playing Gaelic football and playing rugby and playing basketball, and then took his talents to Pro Kick and has taken him to Georgia Tech. And he will be the local favorite. There's probably a few more Shanahans than Uyunglele's in the stands. So
I don't. The Uyunglele's may travel well.
That's true. That's true.
DJ's debut there. And thank you, too, for coming up with what has to be a College Game Day feature for which will function as the Week 0 show. Now, it will be heavily tilted, obviously, because of where we are, to Florida State and Georgia Tech playing, and also to the new structure in college football and the new conference alignments and how the playoffs going to look. And there will be plenty of conference predictions. It will function as that Week 0 show, where it's sort of like a preseason show, but with the added bonus of leading right into the game. And so that'll be a lot of fun. It'll be really cool. I'm looking forward to it. Also. So
here's a question, Rece, as we often talk about, our listeners are Game Day fans. We're talking about Game Day. Next year, they've already announced K-State and Iowa State. Two schools with fine ag, histories going over to Ireland for the game. I wonder if we'll be back for the Farm Bowl.
I don't know. I hope
so.
So.
I hope so too.
I mean, I was really disappointed, obviously, as many were in 2020. We were supposed to go then for, I think it was Notre Dame Navy, if I recall. And the way the set was going to look, the pomp and circumstance that the city had afforded College Game Day there, and the things they were going to do to get us from the set to the stadium and all of that stuff. All of those things look just spectacular. The visuals are going to be amazing, and it's going to be great to get the season started that way with a big bang. And of course, at the upfronts, Disney upfronts yesterday, it was announced, a little secret that we already knew, that our Week 1 trip will be to College Station for Notre Dame and Texas A&M. So yeah, I'm fired up about that too. I understand, Georgia Clemson's going to be noon on ABC now, so College Game Day will lead into that game, but we'll be in College Station. I like the idea of getting us on campus early. neutral sites can be fantastic. Our trips to Charlotte for the neutral site games, neutral site openers have been really good.
Yeah.
And Georgia Clemson's obviously a huge game, but I think the right call was made pretty easily. I thought it was pretty much a walk-in touchdown, as you try to get away from the mixed metaphors of sports, not a slam dunk. It's a walk-in touchdown to go to College Station, first time in a few years, and debut of Elko, his old quarterback leading Notre Dame. Notre Dame highly thought of, early road test, all of those things, a good way to get it on campus. So going to get things started, but all of those teams are going to sort of be looking up in terms of the preseason polls at teams like Georgia, Ohio State, to name just a couple off the top of my head. So I want to talk Ohio State quarterback situation, but first let me ask you this. Reserving the right to change your mind. Mm-hmm. If you had to rank preseason number one right now, are you going with the loaded Ohio State roster with a proven commodity in some respects at quarterback in Will Howard, but, young guys may be pushing him. How will he adapt? New offense, Chip Kelly, all of that stuff. Or are you going with the better quarterback or the more proven quarterback, the higher, more highly regarded draft prospect quarterback at Georgia with Carson Beck, and also a loaded roster? Maybe not quite what Ohio State's bringing back on defense, but still really, really good. And it may prove to be that equal. Which way would you lean right now?
So right now I would take Georgia, Rece.
I actually watched their spring game over the weekend last weekend, sorry. And, the thing that stands out to me is, Michael Williams just looked like a monster. And Nazir Stackhouse is who we remember him being at the tackle. So those are a pair of first round pick, just difference maker, upfront guys who, will really set the tone for Georgia. So I really like their defense. I think Malachi Starks could be one of the better safety prospects we see come through college football. Like a once every 5 year guy. I think people always throw around generational. I don't know if he's Sean Taylor, but I think we're going to be talking about drafting Malachi Starks in 2025, the Field Yates, Jordan Reeds, Matt Millers of the world, in a rare area for safeties to be drafted, because safeties typically aren't good enough to be a top 8-10 pick. That generally doesn't happen. I'm sure you have your safety chart of drafting memorized over the years, but I think it's safe to say you usually don't see one in the top 50. The crop of safeties was one of the thinner crops there. So you're going to have a need in the NFL, and you're going to have a guy like Starks who looks to be the top of that class. There's a kid from Washington State who came out early who ended up going pretty high at safety too. So anyway, but point is, if the two of us who spent a lot of time on draft prep aren't coming off with the top, there just wasn't a stand on the table. We're going to use a first round pick on this guy in the last class. So Malachi Starks is special. And, again, they add the number one recruiting class in the country. I thought Trevor Etienne fit in like he'd been there for a while. And, and it was funny. The Ra Thomas was Mississippi State's leading receiver 2 years ago. Dominic Lovett was Missouri's leading receiver 2 years ago. Those guys didn't have giant impacts last year, but now they're proven SEC guys who are growing into their roles and are going to be really, really solid. And we saw what Dylan Bell could do last year. He was fantastic. So and
you still have Arian Smith who can, run like the wind, right? I mean,
I think Arian Smith's still there, and they have arguably the best returning offensive line in the country. Even to say why Georgia over Ohio State, I think that group is what you point to, Rece. I think their group up front, Ohio State's group is good, but has been a weak point and has especially not been able to go toe-to-toe with Michigan, right? In those games, if you had to distill it. So I really feel like Georgia up front on both sides of the ball is a nose above. Now there's some arguments for Ohio State, certainly. And we can dive in and break them down there. There's resplendent talent, and I think maybe more talent on defense there, Rece, than we've seen.
Well, that's the thing. Everybody came back on defense. Everybody, I'm sure, was well compensated to do so, but good for them. That's what they chose to do, and it's going to make Ohio State a juggernaut. Also raises the stakes and also raises the pressure on the quarterback, because the one thing that could have everything come apart at the seams is if they don't function at the quarterback position at a high enough level. Will Howard assuming that he's the guy is going to play well. But then you have guys like Aaron Noland. You've got Devin Brown, who didn't really get his chance because he got hurt early in the bowl game. They've been high on him. He was in the competition last year with Kyle McCord, even into the season. And then Julian Sayin, who transferred after the coaching change at Alabama, was, according to some services, a top quarterback prospect in the country. And now he's in the room also. I heard an Ohio State beat writer last week say that felt like that maybe Noland was a little bit ahead of Sayin, at least in the spring, in terms of the young guys. But you also have to look at Sayin. His head had to be spinning a little bit because he goes in, he practices with Alabama for the bowl game. Then the coaching change. Then they bring in a transfer with DeBoer from Washington. So he goes, hey, wait a minute, maybe this is not the right spot for me. Takes off to Ohio State. Now he's got to get acclimated. Really talented guy, but so is Nolan. I bring all that up because you know what you're getting for the most part with Will Howard. You know what a Ryan Day / Chip Kelly offense looks like, generally speaking. Is it they say competition, we've got a great room, everybody's pushing each other, all of those things they say. It's got to be Will Howard, at least to start, right?
I would think so. I think the thing that
Will Howard gives them on offense, Rece, which is an element that Kyle McCord, who had a fine season, by the way, led him 11-0 to start the year. He was a very good quarterback. He did not give them an element in the run game. He did not give them escapability. He could not figure it out on 3rd and 4. Will Howard can figure it out on 3rd and 4. Will Howard, they can also call 5 QB runs a game for him. And obviously the guy calling plays for Ohio State has called a few of those zone reads over the years. Chip Kelly.
Are you telling me Chip Kelly doesn't mind running the quarterback?
Does not mind running the quarterback.
Will Howard is old. He's an alpha. There's an element. It's very difficult, Rece, and I think it gets I don't think it gets talked about enough, to go in as a quarterback in January and win the hearts and minds of the locker room to be the starter then. That's why I don't think a single guy who left the portal in the spring, like post-spring, is going to start day one for a team. Maybe Mike Wright will. Like that there might be a guy or two, but I don't think that there is going to be anyone. If you transfer after spring, you have very little chance. But when you look at Sam Hartman last year, 1 year, it went okay, but he didn't come in and dominate. But then you look at Joe Burrow, that second year he took off. You look at Jaden Daniels, that second year he took off. You look at Bo Nix, that second year he took off. You look at Michael Penix. It just takes time. And that's one thing we're learning. I would say, you can't microwave an offensive line, right? Being good in college football takes continuity and time. And it's an era where everyone's in a rush and no one wants to stay in place. So in some ways, continuity can become a competitive advantage. So the challenge for Will Howard is going to be to play like a veteran with his teammates, even though he doesn't know them well. I'm going to add this quick story. I don't think we talked about it on the pod yet. Riley Leonard, when I went and saw him at Notre Dame when I was at the Combine in February, told me a great story. I said, hey, Riley, how did you learn all your teammates? It's hard to walk in on campus and do that. There's an app, I'm sure Chris Davis used it at his various institutions, called Quizlet. You ever heard of this app, Rece?
I have not, no.
Okay. So Quizlet, you and I call them flashcards, but we didn't have iPhones. And he put all, let's just say, 100 of his teammates, walk-ons, everybody, he put all of their pictures and their names in Quizlet. And he memorized everyone's name and face. So the first day he walked in, if Rece Davis was the backup long snapper from Muscle Shoals, Alabama, he would walk in and be like, what's up, Rece? How was your break at Muscle Shoals? And the backup long snapper's like, how does he know who I am? And he said that he went 100 for 100. He said he didn't get one guy's name wrong. So, but I tell the story.
Well, Riley's also a Duke man.
He's a Duke man. He's a Duke man. So anyway, but I thought that was instructive to people are like, oh yeah, he'll just go in and start. It's like, well, it's kind of hard. These guys have to be rallied around you. They have to like you. You have to be connected to them. You have to build. You have to build through adversity sometimes. So, but that was one of my favorite stories of the offseason.
Was he worried? Was he worried at all about because young men of that age are worried about coming off as odd or weird because you and I look at it at our age and go, that's fantastic. What a great job of preparation. What a great job to make personal connections and make the effort to get to know somebody. But when you're 20, you might, how's this dude know where I'm from? I wonder what the reaction is sometimes.
I think because he's Riley Leonard coming there,
helps.
They weren't weirded out as much as they were flattered, right?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, it's his job to follow it up and not just know their names and build all the relationships. But that I thought was like an outreach by him to say, okay, like this guy wants to get to know me, wants to get to know us. He really knows he only has 10 months to do this thing, and he wants to do it the best he can. I guess it's 12 months if he shows up in January. But yeah, like it's a quick deal.
Are you familiar with the concept that there's a Family Guy for everything?
Yes, you bring it up quite often.
Peter
Griffin.
Peter Griffin, but not Peter Griffin in this case. There is also maybe an Andy Griffith show for everything. As you know, I'm a connoisseur of classic television. There is an episode to show you how history repeats itself in different ways, or that maybe a better way to put it, it's that human nature really doesn't change. And the reason I brought up, were they weirded out by it? There's an episode early in the run of the old Andy Griffith show where a stranger moves to town and he knows everything about everybody in town. And people end up rejecting him and getting mad at him because of it. Turns out he had been taking the hometown newspaper. And for our younger listeners, a newspaper is a thing where Pete started once that used to arrive at your house. It was printed on actual paper with ink, and you read stories of the news of the day. So he'd been taking the local newspaper and had learned a lot, and it was so infatuated by the town, he wanted to make it his hometown. He was rejected, and then, of course, once Andy Griffith saved the day, or Sheriff Andy Taylor, as the character's name is, then he was accepted into the greater Mayberry society. So anyway, so I'm glad that Riley Leonard didn't have to go through the rejection angle of that, and instead was fully accepted. But I think your point's a great one, your larger one about having to win over the players. This is not EA Sports College Football 2025, which is going to be a fabulous game when it's released in just over a month, by the way. But
Rece Davis's completely unbiased opinion.
Yeah, well, over, was it 30,000 samples? I think they told me I wrote this down.
How long did that take?
Yeah, I've been doing it for more than 2 years. So here, wow. I did over 250 hours and 30,000 samples. Some of the later ones I recorded in case I think we're going to try to do a piece on it on GameDay at some point, the making of the game. And
well, that'd be fun. People are fired up for that game, man.
Yeah. The Torsten Staley, who is a devout listener of our podcast, by the way, and was sort of the producer of this, said every now and then, especially when I knew we were drawing closer to the end, he said, I would see you and I could tell that you had picked up your phone and just put it like on selfie video. And I start, something like, last time out, they scored on a one-play drive, 75 yards. Let's see what the offense can get going this time, or something like that. And, just little things like that we did. But to the point of the quarterback in a video game or in fantasy football, you just plug a guy in, and if he's good, it should work. Well, there's the human element, especially for college football, even as much as it's changing. And the one thing I would say that Will Howard has going in his favor, among a number of things, I think the other thing, he's a big strapping lad too. He's like 6'4", 240. Oh, yeah. But is that players are familiar with him because they saw what he did at Kansas State, led them to a Big 12 championship, not this most recent season, but in 2022. And also, Ohio State knows those veterans, especially those defensive guys, they know they need the quarterback to get it done. So they're going to be inclined to, not that they would reject him anyway, but they will be inclined to rally behind him because they need him to be successful. That's better for them than relying on a guy, no matter how talented, with one of the younger guys, no matter how talented the younger guys may be. There are things that Will Howard has been through playing at the level he's played for Kansas State that will be beneficial to them, and those players are smart enough to know it. What about the school up north? Do we have a wide open deal, or is that an Alex Orji situation to lose? How do we look at the Michigan race right now?
I think it's Alex Orji, and the watching the spring game and then the buzz out of the spring game was he looked and acted like the starter, right? Yeah. Felt like the starter. It will be interesting to see, Rece, for Michigan. From the time they won the championship till Jim Harbaugh left about 2 weeks later, I think it was like January 26th or something, when he finally took the Chargers job, they were not active in the portal. Did they take a guy or two? Sure, but they were not active. And so there was maybe a window to get a quarterback that closed. And look, there weren't any great options there. There was, a window to upgrade on the offensive line. I think they took one player from Northwestern, maybe two, maybe a long snapper, but they have 5 new starters on the O-line. They have to replace a lot of talent at the receiver position. They have the best tight end in college football. They have one of the most dynamic running backs in college football. Obviously, a question mark at the quarterback, right? Alex Orji's never started a game. He's played big snaps, which is going to help him, right? Mm-hmm. He played. He played against Alabama. He played against Ohio State. I mean, those are some of the most high leverage moments you can play in. So I think Michigan will have the most talented defensive front in the country on the interior for certain. I don't know if their edges are as good as they have been the last couple of years. Now they had the number 1 pick there, whatever that was, 3 years ago, right? So they lost some talent at linebacker. I mean, Junior Colson did a lot for that team. But I do think quarterback-wise, it's Alex Orji, and there will be you have to grow up pretty fast if you've got Texas coming in week 2, and I believe USC coming in by the end of September.
So that's a little different than the Septembers
where they could find their identity the last 2 years and they didn't play anyone out of conference. It's flipped a little bit this year because Ohio State doesn't play anyone out of conference. That Marshall, I believe, is their most difficult out of conference game. So that's going to give the Buckeyes a little time to go and find their identity where they'd always had. I mean, I would say basically almost every year I've done this, Ohio State has had a giant non-conference game.
Back when Oregon was non-conference, they played Oregon in years past. They played Oklahoma. They've played a lot of. Do you think the same people from Ohio State who were screeching about Michigan's non-conference schedule will be doing the same thing this year about their own?
Yeah, I'm sure that'll be equitable.
The levels of the levels of screeching. I do think there is a larger conversation here. And again, all this happened on accident, right? Let's be very clear about this. Yeah. If nobody knew what we're going to have a 12-team playoff, we know we're going to have a 12-team playoff like a year ago. Never mind when these things were scheduled 6 years ago. Yeah. It will be Michigan and Ohio State will be a referendum for how you schedule in the future, though, because there is a fear that people are going to stop playing these awesome interconference games. And look, you and I don't root for teams, but we root for great games. Like you and I are going to be fired up to watch Texas, Michigan. I mean, that's like why you do it. Like different regions, great traditions, the history, the coaches, the star, like all of it. That is college football to me. And we can openly root to continue to have great games. But with a 12-team playoff, and if you can get in the 12-team playoff without having a great non-conference game, what will be the incentive to play it? Like, basically, I think Rece, the scheduling conversation is going to come down to this. If you play a monster non-conference game and then lose 2 conference games, are they going to let a 3-loss team in the college football playoff from the SEC and the Big Ten? And I do think we see that eventually. And I have not gamed all this out, and I know there's people that have gamed all this out, but we used to be a sport in college football, Rece, that was perfection was needed. You had to be perfect or near perfect in order to go win the national title. And now it's going to be like week 6, road loss to the Jets, Patriots still in position for the AFC East. And it's not good or bad. It's just different. But one of the things about college football that made it so amazing was just the emotion attached to the win and the loss, right? Mm-hmm. A loss would just send an entire year, season, career, coaching legacy all spiraling. One loss had the capabilities to do that. Now, Texas goes and loses at Michigan. Okay, they got to buck up and win in SEC play. Michigan loses at home. Okay, no problem. They need to bounce back in league play, and they'll have plenty of opportunities. And that's just a different rhythm and cadence to the sport.
A couple of things, and I will acknowledge for our friends from Tallahassee, their perfection was not deemed enough to make the playoff last year.
Fair.
And that actually, though, Pete, gives me gives me hope. Now, even if you still believe that Florida State should have been in the playoff, and that's a perfectly reasonable take, by the way, the type of thinking that put Alabama, or had Alabama lost, would have put Texas in the playoff ahead of undefeated Florida State. The type of evaluation is the type of evaluation that is going to be needed. The type of evaluation is going to be needed during this 12-team era for the situations you mentioned. If a 3-loss team has challenged itself and played well in those losses against good teams, maybe a couple of them on the road, whatever, that needs to get its due. It doesn't mean they're automatically better than a team with fewer losses, but it means they can be. That's why we have a committee. If we don't want to evaluate that way, then put a formula forth and abide by the formula and be done with it. But otherwise, we're going to have to evaluate teams that way, and there would be differences of opinion because of that. But I hope that we see those games. Now, the one thing, because I want to be consistent, doesn't mean because you played the tough schedule and lost those games that you automatically get credit. You need to play well. I'll drag this example up. The people in 2016 who were so upset that Penn State didn't win the Big Ten, and yet Ohio State, who lost to Penn State, still went to the playoff that year. In my judgment, that was the accurate decision. Here's why. Because one of Penn State's losses, and they had one more, not just counting loss, it wasn't a field goal at the buzzer. It was 49-10. And when you have a field as small as we had in the 4-team era, you can't lose a game 49-10. Yeah. So in this era, if you're evaluating a 3-loss team against a 1 or 2-loss team, one of those losses can't be by 17 points, unless it's but also let me rephrase, it can't just be the number. It can't be decisive. Now, it can be 17 points. It can be 10, and you're driving to get back in the game in the final 2 minutes, and you throw a pick six, and you lose by 17. That's not the same as getting dominated. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So what I'm asking the committee to do, and I think by and large they've done a pretty good job of it, evaluate the games. How was the game played? Or get a formula. So I'm confident that those 3-loss teams who lose by 1 score on the road, who lose, and come up with 3 losses, they're still hovering around 11 or 12. They'll get a proper evaluation, and a team that blows through a schedule and maybe dumps a game to a team they shouldn't lose to, and maybe lose 2, and one of them's a quote unquote bad loss. I think the 3-loss team can get the edge if you deem that they're better. And I hope that's what happens, because we still want the best teams in the playoff, even with this expanded field.
I agree. And
the one certainty, the one safe prediction, I think, in all this is that the annual level of vitriol. Now, our friends in Tallahassee, and by the way, I was on the Florida State should be in the playoff bandwagon, as I said on our podcast throughout last year. Our friends in Tallahassee won't agree with this, but the playoff, when you look at it from a 10-year snapshot, really had only 2 to 3 truly controversial years, Rece, right? The first one, the last one, and then there was, maybe 1.5 others in the middle, but it wasn't that much. The level of rhetoric, vitriol, argument is going to be significantly more, in my opinion, as we go here, because you're going to have the 2-loss team that lost in the Big 12 title game going up against 3-loss SEC Big 10 teams, and it's going to be an interesting snapshot and test case of this new era of football as we see these Power 2 leagues move away. And we've talked about them moving away for a while, and they continue to move away. And as we go down the era of revenue share, which is inevitable, and we're on the cusp of, does that separate even further where a great season in the Big 12 just doesn't touch a pretty darn good season in those other leagues? Those are the arguments we're going to start facing and seeing. And as the Big Ten and SEC fortify their financial might and start maximizing their significantly more television dollars, do those ACC Big 12 type leagues, can they keep their rosters together so they're just not what the G5 is now? That's, I think, the next 5 years of college football question. We're not going to see that right away, but are we going to see, I'm just going to say, Texas just be able to freely poach Oklahoma State, Baylor, fill in the blank, K-State's roster because they just have so much more NIL money in addition to the $20 million rev share. Like those are like, that's the balance of that, and the argument between the two power leagues, the two next tier leagues, and then everybody else, or a lot of it's going to come down to player acquisition and the rhythms of that and how it all works.
And one final thing on this, I disagree with you slightly, not about any of the revenue sharing or all of the poaching. I actually think that the outrage and vitriol is going to be less because it's not going to resonate. I'm not saying it's not going to be just as intense in those quarters, but last year you had Florida State, national
but think of it as like 3-loss LSU.
Undefeated. Yeah, I know, but I'm saying that once you get to 12 instead of 4, and you're talking 3-loss versus 2-loss as opposed to undefeated, it's not going to resonate outside of those precincts. It'll resonate within those precincts. Outside of it, it'll be like the SEC bias that, they took Missouri. Why'd they take Missouri? Oh, well, let's play. And it's not going to resonate and be as long lasting as an undefeated power conference champion in the future.
So when your argument's proven wrong, we're going to have a podcast dedicated to Rece Davis reads his mean tweets. Can we mark that down, Adrian, for sometime around December 5th?
You're misunderstanding though. You're misunderstanding.
I'm not.
Because
I know what you're saying.
The mean tweets are going to come from Lubbock.
Yes.
Okay. They're not going to be widespread. There were people outside of Tallahassee. And others, Bill Connolly, who, I was worried for Bill's health. He was so upset about this.
He was upset.
And, there were people on the outside who were worried. I'm saying that will be lessened because
it'll be more than the NCAA tournament 69.
It'll be closer
and less
to that.
than the Florida State. Yeah. Like it's going to be
closer
somewhere in the
to
middle.
that. Yeah. That's all I'm saying. It's closer to the NCAA tournament. One of my favorite of the many Dick Vitale quotes on Selection Sunday over the years. Oh, can you do that to these kids? When you leave out some, 12-loss team from the horizon or whatever. How can you?
Dick always put 112 teams in the tournament every year. They're in.
Digger wouldn't play me. That was the other thing when I worked with he and Digger Phelps. Digger was a big shot at Notre Dame. He wouldn't play me. So anyway, but it'll be interesting to see. All right, let's wrap this up. Give me a tweet thread. You can go like 280 times 2 characters on where we stand with the revenue sharing, how quickly it's coming in terms of the House versus the NCAA settlement talks and case and evaluation.
So I would say we're somewhere in the neighborhood of a week away of that being voted on, and it's being populated still. ACC meetings are this week. SEC met last week. It's still being populated and discussed and dissected. But I would think that there is a ton of momentum for it passing and for the case to be settled. So this would include the NCAA paying $2.7 billion in back damages, and then a rev share that's been about $20 million pushing forward. So there aren't a lot of new details really that have emerged. It just has to get to the finish line. What's probably most interesting now as we're really dialing in this week is one of the buzzwords, Rece, is protections, right? People want a bullet. I don't have a magic bullet for forever. They want 10 years of serenity. And I would bet the under on serenity. In how it all works. There's Title IX issues. There's what do you do with NIL? There's enough looming issues that I really think that you've got to, you're going to have to, we are still going to have some level of instability, and where that is and where the lawsuits come from, where the next things go, you can solve the antitrust issues, but there are still greater looming issues. The scholarship cap hasn't been figured out yet. That won't happen until after it's signed. And then Congress, our old friends in D.C., there's still probably a need for them to be looped in. Now, we said this back in late January. A settlement of this case says Congress has to help college sports as opposed to save college sports. The conversation a year ago when I went to D.C. for a forum and we were interacting with people there it was basically like we need it was a bailout, and now it's a complement.
Yeah.
So
since I've brought up Family Guy and the Andy Griffith Show, I will encapsulate what Pete said, the desire for serenity now, by quoting our good friend, occasional Seinfeld character Lloyd Braun. Serenity now, insanity later. This has been the College Game Day podcast. Thanks for listening. We encourage you to download it wherever you prefer to get your podcast. Better yet, subscribe. And if you don't subscribe, in the immortal words of Dick Vitale, if I might paraphrase, how could you do that to these guys?